My daughter stole $950,000 from my accounts and flew first class to the Greek islands with her husband and his mother, leaving me alone with a dead hearing aid and a silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat cracking. They thought I was just a deaf old man waiting to be warehoused. What they forgot is that I spent 35 years behind a federal bench. I don't just know the law. I am the law. 3 days later, she called me from Santorini, sobbing and screaming that I had destroyed her life. I calmly reminded her of one simple truth. Sometimes a structure collapses not because of what strikes it from the outside, but because of the rot that has been eating it from within. Thank you for spending your time with this story. Before we continue, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from. I enjoy seeing how far these stories reach. Also, a quick note. Some parts of this story have been fictionalized to enrich the narrative, and any resemblance to real people or locations is purely coincidental. My name is Raymond Cross, though most people in the legal community simply call me Judge Cross. I am 71 years old, and Nashville, Tennessee, has been my home for as long as memory serves. For 35 years, I sat on the federal bench in the Middle District of Tennessee. My days were spent listening to testimony, weighing evidence, and delivering verdicts that determined whether men and women walked free or spent their remaining years behind steel bars. Over those decades, I learned something fundamental about human nature. The most dangerous lies are never shouted. They are whispered softly by the people who claim to love you the most. After my wife Lorraine passed away 18 months ago from a sudden stroke, the world lost its sound. Not literally, though my hearing had been declining for years, and I wore a small device behind my left ear to compensate. I mean that the world lost its music. Lorraine was the melody in every room she entered. Her laugh could fill a courthouse hallway. Her voice on the phone at the end of a long trial day was the only closing argument I ever needed to hear. When she died, I installed a recording system in our farmhouse on Hickory Lane. It was nothing fancy, just a series of small devices disguised as old Bluetooth speakers, tucked onto bookshelves and kitchen counters. Their purpose was simple and private. I had saved every voicemail Lorraine had ever left me, hundreds of them. And on quiet evenings, I would play them through the speakers so her voice could fill the rooms again. It was not technology. It was grief dressed up as sound engineering. The money from selling our family property in Franklin, combined with my federal pension and savings, sat in what I believed was a secure account at First Tennessee Bank. $950,000. My plan was modest. Live out my remaining years on the farm, maintain my dignity, and leave whatever remained as a legacy. I trusted my family completely. That trust, I would later understand, was my first and most catastrophic judicial error. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the illusion shattered. Nashville was trapped beneath one of those heavy southern summer days, when the humidity wraps around your chest like a wet wool blanket, and every breath feels borrowed. I was standing in line at the Walgreens on Broadway, waiting to pick up my prescriptions. Lisinopril for the blood pressure that had been climbing since Lorraine's death, and celecoxib for the arthritis that turned my knees into rusted hinges every morning. The line moved slowly. Overhead, the fluorescent lights buzzed with that constant electric hum that burrows into your skull like a carpenter bee drilling through old wood. By the time I reached the counter, the young pharmacist, a woman named Dana, greeted me with a familiar smile. She had been filling my prescriptions for 2 years. I handed her the slip and slid my debit card into the payment terminal. The card was dark blue, issued by First Tennessee Bank, and it had never once failed me. I waited for the familiar beep of approval. Instead, the machine produced a short, ugly buzz. On the small screen, 2 words appeared that no one ever wants to read. Declined. I frowned. I assumed the chip was dirty. I wiped it against my shirt sleeve and inserted it again. The buzz came back sharper this time, or perhaps it only seemed that way because the woman behind me exhaled loudly through her nose, the universal sound of suburban impatience. Dana leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice the way people do when they are about to deliver bad news in a public space. "I am sorry, Mr. Cross," she said gently. "The system is showing insufficient funds." I let out a dry laugh, the kind that sounds more like a cough. "That cannot be right, Dana. My pension deposited last Friday, and the savings account is linked. There should be close to $950,000 between the two accounts. Could you try running it one more time?" She nodded and swiped the card again. Declined. This time, a cold sweat formed along the back of my neck. It had nothing to do with the Tennessee heat. It was the primal recognition of danger. The same instinct that fires when you step off a curb and hear tires screaming toward you. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I nearly dropped it while opening the banking application. The screen took a moment to load, the small spinning circle mocking my rising panic, while my pulse hammered against my ribs like a fist pounding on a locked door. Then the numbers appeared. Checking account, $0. Savings account, $8.47. I stared at the screen. I refreshed the page. The numbers did not change. $8.47. That was all that remained of 35 years of public service. $8.47 left from the house Lorraine and I had built together. $8.47 left from a career of sitting in judgment over others while, apparently, failing to judge the people closest to me. My legs felt heavy, filled with wet sand. I stepped aside from the counter and scrolled through the transaction history with fingers that would not stop shaking. There it was. A single massive transfer completed earlier that morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Transfer to external account, ending in 7731. Authorized by power of attorney. The words struck me like a gavel, slamming down on marble. Power of attorney. I had never willingly signed a power of attorney. Or had I? And with that question, a memory from 3 weeks earlier came crashing back with the force of a freight train derailing inside my skull. I had been sitting in my kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon. The sun was warm through the window. The arthritis was manageable. Everything had felt ordinary, safe, unremarkable. Then Pamela had arrived. My daughter's mother-in-law rarely visited the farm. She complained about the gravel road, the dust, the distance from her salon. But that afternoon, she had pulled into my driveway with an unusually bright smile, carrying a ceramic teapot and a small tin of loose-leaf chamomile. "I made you some tea, Raymond," she had said sweetly, her voice dripping with a warmth I had never once heard from her in 12 years. "You have been looking so thin since Lorraine passed. You need something to calm your nerves." Her kindness felt strange, misplaced, like finding a rose growing through a crack in a prison wall. But I did not question it. A man who has just lost his wife does not interrogate the people who offer him comfort. He simply drinks the tea, and that single act of trust was the beginning of the end of everything I had built. The tea tasted like chamomile and honey, with a faint trace of lemon. It also tasted like the end of everything I had ever built, though I would not understand that until it was far too late. Pamela Kingsley had never been a kind woman. In the 12 years since my daughter Melissa married her son Troy, I could count the number of genuine smiles Pamela had offered me on one hand and still have fingers left over. She measured the world in transactions. Every favor came with an invoice. Every compliment was a down payment on a future demand. She had owned a hair salon in East Nashville for 20 years before it collapsed beneath a mountain of unpaid taxes. The Internal Revenue Service had placed a lien of $120,000 against her name, and the interest was compounding like a slow infection. Her son Troy was cut from the same cloth. He had been a police officer in the Davidson County Sheriff's Department for 8 years before they terminated him for conduct unbecoming. The unofficial story involved falsified evidence and a missing bag of confiscated cash. After the badge was taken, Troy drifted into insurance sales, but even that could not keep pace with his spending. He owed creditors from Memphis to Murfreesboro. And then there was Melissa. My daughter had been a bright girl once, curious and full of questions. But when Lorraine died, something inside her fractured. She stopped calling. She stopped visiting. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then quarterly, then not at all. I told myself she was processing her grief. What I did not see was that Troy had been whispering in her ear for months, slowly poisoning her perception of me the way termites eat through a support beam. Invisible, patient, devastating. That first Wednesday, when Pamela arrived with the teapot and her manufactured warmth, I was sitting on the back porch watching a pair of cardinals hop along the fence posts. Lorraine had loved cardinals. She believed they carried messages from the dead. Pamela came through the screen door carrying a tray with the teapot and 2 ceramic cups. She had never once used the back door before. She had always knocked on the front and waited to be invited in. But that day she walked in like she owned the place. A judge is trained to notice when someone changes their behavior on the witness stand. It usually means they are about to lie. But I was not in a courtroom. I was in my kitchen, and the rules I applied so ruthlessly to strangers, I never thought to apply to the people who shared my blood. The tea was warm and fragrant. I drank it slowly while Pamela talked about nothing in particular. Somewhere around the second cup, I noticed a faint metallic taste beneath the honey. Subtle. Barely there. Like a penny dissolving on the back of your tongue. I almost mentioned it but decided against it. I did not want to insult her effort. That small, polite, catastrophically naive decision would cost me nearly $1 million. Pamela came back the next day. And the day after that, every afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock, she appeared with her teapot and her smile. By the 4th day, I had stopped questioning it. By the 5th, I had started looking forward to it. Loneliness does that to a man. It makes him grateful for any voice that is not his own echo, bouncing off empty walls. What I did not know was that every cup contained a carefully measured dose of crushed benzodiazepines, sleeping pills Pamela had been stockpiling from her own prescription. The dosage was low enough to avoid suspicion but high enough to accumulate in my system over days. By the end of the first week, I was sleeping 12 hours instead of my usual 6. My thoughts moved like molasses. I blamed the arthritis medication. I blamed the grief. I blamed the summer heat pressing against my skull like a vice. I did not blame the tea. I did not blame the woman who served it. While Pamela kept me sedated, Troy was executing the second phase. He had a key to the farmhouse, given to him by Melissa years ago when trust was still the currency of our family. One night during that first week, while I lay in a drugged sleep so heavy a thunderstorm could not have broken it, Troy entered my bedroom. He moved quietly. The way a man trained in law enforcement knows how to move through a dark room without disturbing the air. He found my hearing aid on the nightstand. It was a small device, flesh-colored, designed to sit behind my left ear and amplify the frequencies I had been losing since my early 60s. Without it, the world became a muffled aquarium. Voices reduced to distant vibrations. Consonants swallowed whole. Troy removed the battery and replaced it with one that was nearly depleted. Not dead. Nearly depleted. The distinction was critical. A dead battery would have prompted me to replace it immediately. A dying battery would produce intermittent function, enough sound to convince me the device was working, but not enough clarity to follow a conversation. It was the kind of subtle sabotage a corrupt cop learns on the job. The next morning, I noticed the world sounded thinner, like someone had draped a cotton blanket over every speaker in the house. I tapped the device. It crackled faintly, then stabilized at a lower volume. I assumed the audiologist needed to recalibrate it. I made a mental note to call the clinic. The tea made sure I never did. Troy came to dinner that Friday with Melissa. He spoke to me in carefully modulated voices, asking simple questions, just below the threshold of my compromised hearing. I would lean forward, squinting as though my eyes could help. I would ask him to repeat himself. He would glance at Melissa with practiced concern, then pull out his phone and press record. He was building a case. Frame by frame, clip by clip, he was constructing the portrait of a senile old man who could not hear, could not respond, could not function. In each video I looked confused and diminished. And I was. But not because my mind was failing, because my tea was poisoned and my hearing aid was sabotaged, and the people I trusted most were dismantling me from the inside out, one frequency at a time. By the end of the first week, I was sleeping 14 hours a day. I thought it was grief catching up with me. I thought Lorraine was pulling me toward her from wherever she had gone. I did not know it was chamomile and benzodiazepines pulling me toward a cage that my own daughter was building with her bare hands. By the second week, I had stopped recognizing the shape of my own days. Morning and afternoon blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. I would wake at noon, sometimes later, with a skull full of fog and joints that felt welded shut. Pamela's tea was always waiting on the kitchen counter when I shuffled downstairs. Still warm, still fragrant, still laced with the chemicals that were slowly erasing me from my own life. Troy moved to the next phase with the precision of a man who had spent years fabricating evidence for a living. He needed a medical professional to validate the fiction he was building. He needed a doctor willing to sign a document declaring that Raymond Cross, a federal judge who had memorized the entire United States Sentencing Guidelines manual, was mentally incompetent. Finding an honest doctor willing to commit that kind of fraud would have been impossible. So Troy did not look for an honest doctor. He looked for Dr. Franklin Holt. I knew the name. I knew it the way a carpenter knows the location of every nail he has ever hammered. 10 years ago, Dr. Holt had appeared in my courtroom, charged with writing fraudulent prescriptions for opioids. He ran a pain clinic on the south side of Nashville that was less a medical practice and more a pharmaceutical drive-through. I reviewed the evidence. I weighed the testimony, and I sentenced him to 3 years of probation, revocation of his prescribing privileges, and mandatory community service. He lost his clinic. He lost his reputation. He spent the next decade rebuilding a modest general practice in a strip mall near Antioch, dispensing antibiotics and resentment in equal measure. He hated me. Troy knew this because Troy had been one of the officers who investigated the case before his own termination. They had stayed in contact the way corrupt men do, through favors and silence. Troy brought Dr. Holt to the farmhouse on a Thursday morning during the second week. I was in bed. I had been in bed for 16 hours. The tea from the previous evening had been particularly strong, and the world felt like it was wrapped in several layers of gauze. I heard voices downstairs, muffled and indistinct through the dying hearing aid. But I could not summon the energy to investigate. My limbs felt bolted to the mattress. Dr. Holt examined me for approximately 12 minutes. I know this because the recording system captured the entire visit. He checked my pulse. He shone a light in my eyes. He asked me 3 questions, each one delivered in a low mumble deliberately pitched below what my sabotaged hearing aid could process. When I failed to respond coherently, he nodded at Troy and made a note on his clipboard. His examination was a performance, a piece of theater staged for an audience of 1 corrupt cop and 1 greedy mother. That afternoon, Dr. Franklin Holt signed a medical certification declaring that Raymond Allen Cross exhibited significant cognitive decline consistent with moderate to advanced dementia and was, in his professional opinion, unable to manage his personal or financial affairs. He signed it with the same hand I had once watched tremble as I read his sentence in open court. The signature was his revenge. It was also his second federal crime. Melissa arrived 2 days later, on a Saturday. I remember it was Saturday, because the morning light through the bedroom window had that particular golden quality that Lorraine always said made the farm look like a painting. Melissa stood at the foot of my bed holding a clipboard and a stack of papers. Her eyes were red. She had been crying, or she had been made to look like she had been crying. With Melissa, I could no longer tell the difference. "Dad," she said softly, her voice trembling. "The doctor says you need to sign these forms. It is for your protection. If something happens, if you have to go to the hospital, we need to be able to make decisions for you." She sat on the edge of the bed. She placed the pen in my hand. The papers swam before my eyes, the letters crawling across the page like ants marching through spilled sugar. I could not read a single word. The benzodiazepines had turned my vision into a kaleidoscope of shifting shapes and dissolving borders. But I could see her face. My daughter's face. The face I had watched emerge into the world 32 years ago, in a delivery room at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, the face I had memorized in every stage of its evolution, from infant to toddler to teenager to woman. She was crying. My daughter was crying and asking me to sign a piece of paper that she said would protect me. So I signed. My hand shook. The signature came out crooked and fractured, the handwriting of a man who could barely hold a pen, let alone comprehend the document it was marking. But I signed because she was my daughter. I signed because I trusted her the way a foundation trusts the earth beneath it. Completely, unconsciously, and without any mechanism for doubt. Then she asked for my phone. "Dad," she said gently, "there are so many scammers these days targeting older people. Let me set up some security features so nobody can get into your accounts." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like something a caring daughter would do. I unlocked the phone and handed it to her. I gave her my passcodes when she asked. I gave her everything. While I drifted back into the chemical fog, Melissa worked quickly. She added her own fingerprint and facial recognition to my device. She transferred the two-factor authentication from my number to hers. She connected my banking applications to a new email address that I had never seen. Then she used the power of attorney I had just signed, the document I believed was a medical form, to link my accounts directly to a joint account she shared with Troy. It was not a mistake. It was not a moment of weakness. It was architecture. The tea, the hearing aid, the videos, the doctor, the paperwork, the phone. Every element had been engineered with the same cold precision I had once admired in the most methodical criminals who stood before my bench. They had taken apart a federal judge the way a demolition crew takes apart a condemned building. One beam at a time. One bolt at a time. Until the structure could no longer support its own weight. But there was one detail they missed. One element they never accounted for in their careful planning. On the bookshelf in the living room, behind a framed photograph of Lorraine standing in her tomato garden, sat what appeared to be an old Bluetooth speaker. It was dusty. It was unremarkable. Troy had walked past it a dozen times without a second glance. Pamela had set her teapot down beside it every afternoon. Melissa had stood 3 feet from it while practicing her tears before climbing the stairs to my bedroom. It was not a speaker. It was a recording device. Part of the system I had installed after Lorraine died so I could hear her voicemails fill the empty rooms. And for 3 weeks, it had been recording everything. Every whispered conversation. Every rehearsed lie. Every detail of the conspiracy that my own family had constructed in my living room while I lay upstairs dissolving in chamomile and betrayal. They did not know it existed. But I would. Soon enough, I would hear every word. And when I did, the verdict would already be written. I was still standing in the Walgreens parking lot when my phone buzzed in my hand. The screen showed an Instagram notification. And for a moment, I wished I had never learned how to use social media. The memory of those 3 weeks released me, and I was returned to the brutal present. The Tennessee sun was hammering the asphalt. My banking app still glowed on the screen, $8.47 burning there like a scar. I almost did not open the notification. Instagram was something I barely understood. A world of filters and hashtags that belonged to a generation I had spent decades sentencing rather than joining. But I followed Melissa there. It was the only window I had left into her life. I tapped the notification. The image loaded slowly, as though the universe wanted to give me one last chance to look away. I did not look away. The photograph showed the interior of a first-class cabin. Wide ivory leather seats that reclined into beds. Polished wooden panels. Crystal glasses, catching the light like tiny chandeliers. In the center sat Melissa, holding a tall flute of champagne with the smile of a woman who believed she had just escaped gravity. She wore a new designer blouse with gold buttons and oversized sunglasses pushed onto her forehead like a crown. Beside her sat Troy, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, wearing the satisfied grin of a man who had never earned a single thing he possessed. Across the aisle, Pamela raised her own glass toward the camera. The same mouth that had poured me 3 weeks of poisoned tea was now wrapped around champagne paid for with my life savings. Then I read the caption, and something inside my chest went very still. Finally breathing. New chapter begins. Goodbye burden. Hello freedom. Hashtag Greek dreams. Hashtag family first. Hashtag new beginnings. Goodbye burden. I was the burden. 35 years of public service. 40 years of fatherhood. A lifetime of sacrifice reduced to a hashtag. I pressed the call button beside Melissa's name. The phone rang 4 times. Then static, followed by the hum of a pressurized cabin at cruising altitude. Hello. Melissa's voice came through loud and slurred. Dad. Is that you? You emptied the accounts, Melissa, I said. My voice carried the same tone I had used for 3 decades when addressing a guilty defendant. You took everything. A pause. Then a giggle. Oh, Daddy, do not be so dramatic. We just borrowed it. You were letting it rot in the bank. We are investing in our happiness. Is that not what you always wanted? You left me with $8, I said. I cannot buy my medication. She sighed. The long, exasperated exhale I had heard 1,000 times since she was 15. Stop guilt-tripping me, Dad. You have your pension. Troy's voice cut in sharp. Give me the phone, babe. A rustle. Then my son-in-law's voice filled the car with the arrogance of a man who has never built anything but has perfected the art of taking. Listen, old man, Troy said. It is done. The guardianship is filed with the Davidson County Probate Court. You are officially a ward of the state of Tennessee. You have no legal standing. You do not control your money. You do not control your property. You do not even control your own medical decisions anymore. I understand exactly what it means, I said quietly. It means you committed fraud. Troy laughed, cold and brittle. Fraud? We have a signed power of attorney, a medical certification from a licensed physician, video evidence of your decline, every document notarized and filed. This is airtight. You cannot touch us. In the background, Pamela's voice rang out. Tell him thank you for the upgrade, Troy. This champagne tastes like freedom. They all laughed. 3 predators celebrating above the Atlantic, drunk on stolen champagne and the certainty of victory. Then Troy delivered the final blow. Oh, one more thing, he said, his voice dropping to casual cruelty. We called Adult Protective Services this morning, told them you have been wandering the neighborhood, talking to yourself. We explained your advanced dementia. They are sending a team to your house right now. We already reserved a bed for you at the state facility in Murfreesboro. 3 meals and a window. That is more than you deserve, Raymond. The line went dead. He did not give me the courtesy of a goodbye. He simply ended the call, the way you end a transaction. With a click and a sense of completion. I sat without moving for a full minute. The heat was building inside the cabin like pressure in a sealed chamber. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. Steady, but hard. I looked at the photo one more time. My daughter laughing at 30,000 feet. My money buying her champagne. My silence buying her freedom. Then something shifted inside me. It was not rage. Rage is hot and reckless. The emotion of amateurs. This was something colder. Something I had not felt since the last time I looked a defendant in the eye and sentenced him to life without parole. It was judgment. Pure, calculated, irreversible judgment. I started the engine. I was not going home to cry. I was not going to call the police. The police would see the guardianship papers and the medical certification and hand me over to the social workers like a package marked fragile. This required a different intervention. This required someone who understood that the most devastating weapon in the American legal system is not a gun or a badge. It is a filing, I pulled out of the parking lot and turned toward downtown Nashville. I was going to see Gloria Vance, the most relentless elder law attorney in the state of Tennessee, and I was about to open a case file that my daughter did not even know existed. They believed they had already won. They believed the game ended the moment they seized the king. But they had forgotten something fundamental about chess. Sometimes a single pawn, placed with precision and moved at the exact right moment, can bring down an entire empire. I was halfway to Gloria Vance's office when a thought struck me with the force of a snapping cable. I could not walk into a lawyer's office empty-handed. In 35 years on the bench, I had never once seen a case won without evidence. Arguments are wind. Evidence is stone. And the stones I needed were sitting inside my farmhouse on Hickory Lane, waiting for me in places that Troy and Melissa had never thought to look. I took the next exit and looped back toward the farm. When I turned onto Hickory Lane, I saw them before I saw the house. A white van with the Tennessee state seal, parked in my driveway. Behind it, an ambulance with its lights pulsing in slow, silent rotation, red and white reflections sliding across the oak trees like a mechanical heartbeat. 2 EMTs in Navy uniforms stood near the porch steps, arms folded, radiating the patient authority of men who were accustomed to collecting the unwilling. On the porch itself, a woman in a beige blazer held a clipboard against her chest and knocked firmly on the front door. They were there. They had actually come. Troy had not been bluffing. They had sent the retrieval team to collect the senile old judge and deliver him to a state-run warehouse in Murfreesboro, where he could stare out a window and wait to die, while his family spent his life savings on Greek sunsets. For a moment, I considered driving past. If I stopped, if I stepped out of this car, the paperwork might swallow me whole. The guardianship was filed. The medical certification was signed. On paper, I was a confused old man who needed to be protected from himself. But I was not on paper. I was behind the wheel of a 10-year-old Buick with a half-tank of gas and 35 years of courtroom instinct telling me that the best way to discredit a fraudulent case is to let the prosecution see the defendant standing upright. I pulled into the driveway behind the white van and turned off the engine. I sat for 3 seconds, breathing slowly. Then I stepped out. The woman in the beige blazer noticed me first. She tapped one of the EMTs on the shoulder and pointed. Both men turned, their expressions shifting from professional readiness to mild confusion. They had been expecting someone very different. A shuffling, hollow-eyed man who did not know his own name. Instead, they saw a 6'2" former federal judge standing with his spine straight and his jaw set like the cornerstone of a building that refuses to fall. "Mr. Cross," the woman called, walking toward me. Her voice carried the soft, exaggerated cadence that people reserve for children and golden retrievers. "I am Karen Palmer, from Adult Protective Services. Your family has expressed serious concerns about your well-being." I met her eyes without blinking. "Which family would that be, Karen? The daughter who is currently drinking stolen champagne over the Mediterranean? Or the son-in-law who was fired from the Davidson County Sheriff's Department for evidence tampering?" Karen stopped mid-stride. Her clipboard lowered half an inch. That was not the response she had rehearsed for. I continued before she could recover. "My name is Raymond Allen Cross. I served as a United States District Judge for the Middle District of Tennessee from 1989 until 2023. I currently maintain senior status with the federal judiciary. Yesterday morning, I submitted a consulting opinion on a sentencing disparity case to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. The opinion was 14 pages long and cited 17 precedents including Booker v. United States and Gall v. United States. I paused, letting the silence do its work the way I had done 10,000 times from the bench. "Would you like me to recite the current composition of the United States Supreme Court?" I asked calmly. "Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Thomas, Justice Sotomayor, Justice Kagan, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Kavanaugh, Justice Barrett, Justice Jackson, Justice Alito. 9 justices. I can give you their appointment dates and their most significant majority opinions if you have the time. Karen glanced at the EMTs. They shifted uncomfortably, the heavy medical bags on their shoulders suddenly feeling inappropriate. "Sir," Karen said, her voice dropping the patronizing melody. "The report we received stated you were nonverbal and disoriented, that you were exhibiting signs of advanced cognitive decline. We were told you could not recognize family members." "You were told a lie," I said evenly, "and I can prove it. But first, I need you to understand something about the legal framework you are operating under." Tennessee Code Annotated. Section 34-1-101 requires a formal hearing before a guardianship can restrict an individual's civil liberties. An emergency guardianship can be granted ex parte only upon clear and convincing evidence of imminent danger. A stack of videos filmed by a disgraced police officer and a medical certification signed by a doctor I personally convicted of prescription fraud 10 years ago does not meet that threshold. It does not come close. Karen stared at me. I watched the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was a bureaucrat, but she was not unintelligent. She could see the pressed shirt. She could see the steady hands. She could hear a man constructing legal arguments with the fluency of someone who had built his entire life inside the walls of a courthouse. "Mr. Cross," she said slowly, dropping her clipboard to her side, "I cannot force you into that ambulance. You are clearly competent." However, she raised a hand before I could respond. "I must inform you that the guardianship order remains legally active until a judge formally revokes it. Your daughter, acting under the power of attorney, has listed this property for emergency liquidation. A realtor has been contacted to change the locks. Legally, sir, until the guardianship is overturned, you do not have the authority to reside here. If you enter this house after the locks are changed, you would be trespassing on property that is technically under your daughter's control." I looked past her at the farmhouse. The white clapboard siding I had repainted last spring. The green shutters Lorraine had chosen from a catalog 30 years ago. The rose bushes along the porch railing, blooming in defiant reds and pinks, the same roses Lorraine had planted the summer Melissa was born. This was my home. Every nail, every board, every memory pressed into these walls like flowers in a heavy book. "I understand the law, Karen," I said. My voice was steady, but something cracked beneath it. A hairline fracture that only I could feel. I wrote half of it. "Just give me 10 minutes inside. A man deserves to collect his own memories before they change the locks on his life." Karen hesitated. She looked at the EMTs. She looked at the house. Then she nodded once. A small concession from a woman who recognized that the situation she had been sent to manage bore no resemblance to the situation she had found. "10 minutes, Mr. Cross," she said quietly. "Then we all have to clear out." I walked past her. I walked past the EMTs and their useless stretcher. I put my key in the lock. It turned with a familiar, heavy click, the sound of coming home for what I knew might be the last time. The door opened, and the smell of lemon polish and emptiness washed over me like a verdict I was not prepared to hear. They had stripped the place like locusts moving through a wheat field. The television was gone. The silver candlesticks Lorraine had inherited from her grandmother were gone. The oil painting of the Smoky Mountains had been pulled from the wall, leaving a pale rectangle on the wallpaper like a wound that refused to close. I walked through the living room slowly, cataloging the absences. The bookshelf had been ransacked. My first edition of To Kill a Mockingbird, signed by Harper Lee, was gone. The antique mantel clock that had marked every hour of my marriage was gone. The china cabinet stood open and empty, its glass shelves reflecting nothing but dust. The study had suffered the worst. The computer was gone. Desk drawers had been upended, their contents scattered across the floor. Old tax returns, case summaries, birthday cards Melissa had made when she was 7, crayon hearts and misspelled love now trampled under boot prints. They had been looking for money, bonds, anything with a dollar sign. They searched the obvious places because they were obvious people. Troy thought like a corrupt cop. He looked for what was visible, what he could grab and shove into a bag. He saw the drywall and assumed that was the house. He never examined the joists. I walked back to the living room. My eyes went directly to the bookshelf against the far wall. Most books had been pulled down and tossed aside. But on the third shelf, tucked between a water-stained Black's Law Dictionary and a Tennessee Bar Association directory, sat a small gray rectangle, dusty, unremarkable, roughly the size of a paperback novel. To anyone who did not know, it looked like an old Bluetooth speaker bought at a drugstore for $15 and forgotten. Troy had walked past it a dozen times. Pamela had set her teapot beside it every afternoon. Melissa had stood within arm's reach while rehearsing her tears before climbing the stairs to poison me with paperwork. It was not a speaker. It was a recording device. Part of the system I had installed 18 months ago, 5 small units disguised as ordinary electronics, placed throughout the house. Their original purpose was sentimental. After Lorraine died, I programmed the system to play her voicemails through the speakers at random intervals. Her voice would fill the kitchen while I made coffee. Her laugh would drift through the hallway while I walked to the mailbox. But the system also recorded. Continuously. Automatically. Every sound within range was captured on a small hard drive hidden inside the main unit. A feature I had activated by default and never bothered to turn off because I never imagined there would be anything worth recording in the empty rooms of a grieving old man. I picked up the device. I pressed the small recessed button on the back. A tiny green light blinked twice, confirming it was still active. I connected my earbuds and scrolled to the files dated 2 weeks ago. Thursday, 2:14 in the afternoon, approximately 30 minutes before Pamela brought the tray upstairs. I pressed play. Troy's voice came first. Clear, confident, completely unguarded. Switch the batteries tonight. He will not hear a thing by morning. We need at least 2 more weeks of footage before Holt will sign off. The more confused he looks on camera, the stronger the filing. Then Pamela, casual, almost bored. And the sleeping pills in the tea? How long do we keep that going? 3 weeks should do it. Troy replied. By then, his system will be so saturated, he will not be able to stand up straight. The doctor will sign whatever I put in front of him. Holt owes me, and he hates the old man. 2 birds. 1 prescription pad. A pause. Then Melissa, quieter than the others. Are you sure he will not figure it out? He is smart, Troy. He was a federal judge. Troy laughed. Was, babe. Was a judge. Right now, he is a confused old man who cannot hear his own doorbell. By next month, he will be in a state facility, and we will be on a beach in Santorini spending his money. I pulled the earbuds out. My hands were steady. A judge does not tremble when the evidence confirms what he already suspected. He simply enters it into the record and proceeds to sentencing. I walked to the bedroom. On the wall above the dresser hung a framed photograph of Lorraine standing in her tomato garden, hands dirty, smile wide, eyes full of the joy that comes from growing something with your own hands. I lifted the frame off the wall. Behind it, recessed into the drywall, was a small steel safe. Troy had never seen it. He had never moved the photograph because to him it was just a picture of a dead woman. He did not understand that Lorraine was still protecting me from beyond the grave. I spun the combination. Left to 19, right to 52, left to 8. The year we met, the year we married, the number of roses on our first date. The safe clicked open. Inside were 2 items. A promissory note for $200,000, signed by Troy Kingsley 4 years ago when he had begged me for a loan to cover his gambling debts. The note contained a clause I had insisted on. Callable on demand, payable in full within 72 hours. Troy had signed it without reading the fine print. People who borrow money never do. The second item was a manila folder containing the complete case file of United States versus Franklin Holt, the trial transcript, evidence exhibits, and the sentencing memorandum I had personally written 10 years ago. I took both. I also took Lorraine's photograph. I closed the safe and walked out of the bedroom, through the hallway, past the kitchen where Pamela had brewed her poison, past the living room, where my family had whispered their conspiracy, 3 feet from a microphone they never knew existed. Karen Palmer was checking her watch on the porch. The EMTs leaned against the ambulance, looking bored. "I have what I need," I told her. She looked at what I carried. A small gray device, a folded document, a manila folder, a framed photograph. She did not ask questions. She simply nodded and stepped aside. I placed everything on the passenger seat of my car. The recording device, the promissory note, the case file, and Lorraine. 3 weapons and 1 guardian angel. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, my farmhouse grew smaller until it disappeared around the bend of Hickory Lane. I did not cry. A judge does not cry when the evidence has been collected. He simply prepares the case. And the case I was about to build would be the most devastating verdict my family had ever received. I walked into Gloria Vance's office 20 minutes later carrying a recording device, a promissory note, a manila folder, and the steady heartbeat of a man who had just located every load-bearing wall in his enemy's house. Gloria's practice occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian on Church Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse. She was mid-50s, silver hair cut sharp at the jaw, reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. 15 years specializing in elder abuse litigation. 0 losses. Defense attorneys in Nashville called her the Hammer, not because she was loud, but because when she struck, the nail went all the way through. She looked up as I entered. "Raymond," she said, rising from her chair. "I have been trying to reach you. The trust monitoring system flagged irregular transactions this morning. What happened?" I placed the 3 items on her desk one at a time, like a prosecutor laying exhibits before a jury. The recording device, the promissory note, the manila folder. "My daughter happened," I said. I sat down and told her everything. The tea, the hearing aid, the videos, Dr. Holt, the power of attorney, the guardianship, the $950,000 funding a first-class vacation to the Greek islands. I delivered it chronologically, precisely, without embellishment, the way testimony should be given. Gloria listened without interrupting. When I finished, she picked up the recording device. "How much is on here?" 3 weeks of continuous audio, I said, including the conversation where Troy discusses the sleeping pills and his arrangement with Dr. Holt. She connected the device to her computer, scrolled to the file I had flagged, and pressed play. Troy's voice filled the office. "Switch the batteries tonight. He will not hear a thing by morning." Then Pamela. "And the sleeping pills and the tea? How long?" 3 weeks should do it. Holt will sign whatever I put in front of him." Gloria stopped the playback. She removed her glasses and set them on the desk. "Raymond," she said carefully, "this is not just theft. This is criminal conspiracy, poisoning, forged medical documentation, fraudulent guardianship, wire fraud across international borders. We are looking at a minimum of 6 charges across 3 defendants. 4 defendants, I corrected. Do not forget Dr. Holt." She reached for the manila folder and opened it. Recognition flickered across her face. "United States v. Franklin Holt," she read. "Fraudulent prescription case. Sentenced by the Honorable Raymond A. Cross." She looked up. "The doctor who signed your evaluation is the same doctor you convicted 10 years ago." "The same doctor," I confirmed. "Troy brought him in because Holt had a grudge. The certification is fraudulent. The recording proves Troy arranged everything." Gloria set the file down and picked up the promissory note. She read it twice. $200,000, she murmured. "Callable on demand. payable within 72 hours. Troy signed this? 4 years ago, I said. He came begging for money to cover gambling debts. I made him sign with that clause because I knew he was unreliable. I never called it because I was trying to keep the family together. Gloria leaned back. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that fills a courtroom when the jury has heard the final evidence and the weight of the verdict begins to settle. Let me lay out the battlefield, she said, pulling a legal pad toward her. First, the money. $950,000 transferred from a fiduciary guardianship account to a personal account for luxury travel. That triggers an immediate taxable event. Federal bracket, 37%. Plus penalties for breach of fiduciary duty and early withdrawal on the retirement component. She punched numbers into a calculator. The keys clicked like tumblers falling into place. Total estimated liability to the IRS, she said, turning the calculator toward me. Approximately $403,000. Due immediately upon flagging. So they owe the government roughly 77% of what they stole, I said. And the IRS does not accept champagne as payment, Gloria replied. There was a blade behind her words. Now, 4 simultaneous actions. She held up her hand and counted on her fingers. 1. Emergency motion to vacate the guardianship based on the fraudulent medical certification and audio evidence. I will send this directly to Chief Judge William Morrison. You have a professional relationship? 30 years, I said. I appointed his first clerk. Good. He will expedite. 2. Suspicious activity report to the Treasury Department, plus notification to IRS criminal investigation. They will freeze every account linked to Melissa and Troy's social security numbers within 24 hours. 3. Audio recording and Holt case file submitted to the Davidson County District Attorney. Charges will include aggravated elder abuse, attempted manslaughter by poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsification of medical documents. She tapped the promissory note with her index finger. 4. You call the debt. Troy has left the country with stolen funds. He is using proceeds of a crime. Under the terms of this note, criminal activity and flight from jurisdiction constitute grounds for immediate demand. $200,000. 72 hours. If he cannot pay, you seize every asset he owns. Gloria set her pen down. Her expression was one I had seen on prosecutors throughout my career. The look of someone who knows the case is one before the opening statement. Raymond, she said quietly, if we pull all 4 triggers at once, they will have nothing left. Not a dollar, not a house, not a future. Are you sure? I thought about the $8.47. I thought about the tea that tasted like chamomile and betrayal. I thought about Lorraine's photograph in the car, her dirty hands, and her perfect smile. I am a judge, Gloria, I said. I do not make decisions I am not sure about. Gloria picked up her phone before I had finished the sentence. She dialed the first number from memory, her fingers moving with the practiced speed of a woman who had spent 15 years dismantling predators for a living. While she spoke to the Treasury Department's suspicious activity hotline, I pulled out my own phone and scrolled to a number I had not called in over a year. William Morrison, Chief Judge of the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. We had entered the judiciary in the same year, 1989. We had shared a bottle of bourbon on the night of our respective confirmations and had maintained a friendship built on mutual respect and a shared belief that the bench was not a throne, but a responsibility. The phone rang twice. Then a voice I knew as well as my own answered. Raymond, Bill said. His tone carried the warmth of old friendship tempered by the caution of a man who understood that former colleagues do not call during business hours without a reason. It has been too long. How are you holding up, Bill? I said, keeping my voice level. I need a favor. Not as a friend. As a fellow judge who believes in the system, the warmth in his voice cooled to professional attention. Tell me, Someone used a corrupt physician and fabricated evidence to obtain an emergency guardianship order against me in Davidson County Probate Court. I have audio recordings of the conspiracy and documentary proof that the certifying doctor was previously convicted in my courtroom for prescription fraud. I need an emergency review of the guardianship order before my family sells my home out from under me. There was a pause on the line. The kind of silence a judge produces when he is already drafting the order in his head. You said audio recordings, Bill repeated carefully. Of the conspiracy itself? Every word, I confirmed, including detailed discussion of the method used to incapacitate me. Sleeping pills dissolved in tea over a 3-week period. Good God, Raymond. Bill's voice dropped low. I will have the review on my desk by morning, and I am calling the Judicial Ethics Board about that doctor personally. If he used his medical license to facilitate elder abuse against a sitting senior judge, he will not have that license by the end of the week. Thank you, Bill, I said. That is all I needed. I hung up and looked at Gloria. She had finished her first call and was already dialing the second. She held up one finger, signaling me to wait, and spoke into the phone with the clipped efficiency of a battlefield commander. Yes. IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I am reporting an unauthorized transfer of $950,000 from a fiduciary guardianship account. The funds have been moved offshore and are currently being used to finance personal luxury expenditures in Greece. I have documentary evidence of conspiracy, poisoning, and fraudulent medical certification. The Social Security numbers of the primary subjects are as follows. She read the numbers from her legal pad. I watched her face as she listened to the response. She nodded twice, made a note, and hung up. 24 hours, she said. Every account linked to their identities will be frozen by morning. Credit cards, checking, savings, brokerage, all of it. She picked up the promissory note and slid it into a fresh manila envelope. I will have the demand letter served electronically within the hour. $200,000. 72 hours. If Troy does not pay, and he will not pay because he cannot pay, we file for immediate seizure of all collateral assets, including the house. And the district attorney? I asked. She held up her phone. That is call number 4. She dialed. I listened as she outlined the criminal charges to the assistant DA on duty. Aggravated elder abuse, attempted manslaughter by poisoning, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsification of medical documents. She offered the audio recording as primary evidence and the Holt case file as corroboration. The assistant DA asked 3 questions. Gloria answered each one without hesitation. Then she hung up. Warrants will be drafted by morning, she said. Pamela Kingsley for the poisoning. Troy Kingsley for conspiracy and fraud. Dr. Franklin Holt for falsification of medical documents. And because they have left the country, their passports will be flagged in the international database. I sat in the leather chair, listening to the silence that followed the last phone call. 4 calls. 4 detonations. 4 walls of my daughter's stolen kingdom crumbling simultaneously in offices across Nashville and Washington. And she was sitting on a cliff in Santorini right now, sipping wine, watching the sunset, believing she was untouchable. Gloria walked me to the door. She looked at me, the way doctors look at patients, after delivering difficult news, with compassion sharpened by honesty. Raymond, she said softly, go get something to eat. Get some rest. You have been running on adrenaline and righteous anger for 6 hours. The machinery is in motion now. Let it grind. I nodded. She was right. I had done what I came to do. The charges were filed. The accounts were flagged. The debt was called. The guardianship was under review. All that remained was gravity. I walked out of the air-conditioned office into the Nashville evening. The heat had softened slightly, the sun dropping behind the skyline and stretching long shadows across Church Street. I had $8.47. I had a half tank of gas. I had no home to return to. But I had just filed 4 simultaneous legal actions that would detonate across 2 continents within 24 hours. I drove to the Cracker Barrel on Interstate 40. I parked in the far corner of the lot, away from the families loading bags into SUVs and the truckers stretching their legs. I went inside and ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a grilled cheese sandwich and a glass of water. $4.29. It left me with $4.18 to my name. I ate slowly. The cheese was processed. The bread was thin. It was the best meal I had eaten in 3 weeks because it was the first meal in 3 weeks that was not laced with poison. Before I tell you what happened next on that cliff in Santorini, drop a comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Also, a quick note. The next part of this story includes some fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. Some details have been adjusted for narrative effect. I finished my sandwich and walked back to the car. I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and stared at the ceiling. The parking lot lights hummed faintly through the windshield, casting pale orange rectangles across the upholstery. 4,000 miles away, the sun was setting over the Aegean Sea. The sky was turning shades of amber and rose, the kind of sunset that postcards cannot capture and stolen money cannot buy. My daughter was about to sit down to the most expensive dinner of her life. She did not know it would also be the last dinner she could afford. 4,000 miles away, on a cliff overlooking the Aegean Sea, my daughter was raising a glass of Assyrtiko wine to toast the death of my dignity. She had no idea that her own funeral had already been scheduled. I can picture the scene perfectly. I know these people. I know how they perform when they believe no one is keeping score. I know the way Troy inflates when he has money that does not belong to him. I know the way Pamela preens when she is surrounded by things she cannot afford. And I know the way Melissa smiles when she has convinced herself that what she has done is justified. I have watched defendants wear that same smile in my courtroom for 35 years. It never lasts past the verdict. The restaurant sat perched on the edge of the caldera, Santorini's volcanic cliff face that drops 500 feet straight into the dark blue water below. White linen tables lined the terrace. Candles flickered inside glass lanterns, their flames bending in the warm Aegean breeze that carried the scent of jasmine and sea salt. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky in bands of copper and rose. And the other diners, European diplomats, shipping magnates, old Mediterranean money, sat in quiet appreciation of a view that had been drawing travelers to this island for 3,000 years. My family was not quiet. They were loud the way people are loud when they are spending someone else's money and mistaking volume for belonging. Troy had requested the best table, the one closest to the cliff edge, with an unobstructed view of the caldera. He wore a new linen shirt he had purchased that morning at a boutique in Oya, the price tag still visible inside the collar because he had not bothered to remove it. He sat with his legs crossed, one arm draped over the back of his chair, surveying the restaurant with the proprietary gaze of a man who believed that wealth was not something you earned, but something you seized. Melissa sat beside him in a white sundress and gold earrings that caught the candlelight. She looked relaxed in a way I had not seen in years, the tension gone from her shoulders, the worry lines smoothed from her forehead. She was beautiful, and she was a thief. The two facts coexisted without contradiction, the way a building can be architecturally stunning and structurally rotten at the same time. Pamela occupied the third chair, draped in a silk shawl she had picked up at the Athens airport. Around her neck hung a gold chain with a pendant that probably cost more than my monthly pension. She was fanning herself with the menu, not because she was warm but because she enjoyed the gesture. It made her feel European. They ordered everything. Troy started with the seafood platter, a tower of oysters, prawns, and grilled octopus arranged on a bed of crushed ice. Melissa chose the bluefin tuna, seared rare and drizzled with olive oil from a local grove. Pamela selected the Mediterranean lobster, the most expensive item on the menu, and made a point of telling the waiter she wanted the largest one available. For wine, Troy ordered 2 bottles of Assyrtiko from a vineyard in Pyrgos. the kind of crisp volcanic white that sommelier described with words like minerality and terroir, and that Troy described by saying, "It goes down smooth." While they waited for the food, they talked about the future. Their future. A future built entirely on the rubble of mine. "I have been looking at properties online," Troy announced, leaning forward with the conspiratorial enthusiasm of a man sharing a business plan he had invented between cocktails. "There is a villa in Mykonos. 6 bedrooms, infinity pool overlooking the sea, private dock. The owner is desperate. We could pick it up for $600,000, renovate it, and flip it in 2 years for double." Melissa's eyes widened. "A villa? Oh, Troy. That sounds incredible. We could spend summers there. I could start painting again. And I will take the guest cottage." Pamela added quickly, adjusting her gold pendant. "I have always said the Mediterranean air would do wonders for my constitution." Troy raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he declared. "To freedom." Pamela echoed. "To finally living," Melissa said softly. And for a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind her eyes. A shadow. A hesitation. The ghost of a conscience that had not been fully extinguished. But then she clinked her glass against theirs and drank, and the shadow disappeared beneath the wine like a stone sinking into the Aegean. The food arrived in waves. They ate with the appetite of people who had been starving not for sustenance but for status. Troy spoke with his mouth full, gesturing with his fork as he outlined plans for a second property in Tuscany. Pamela dissected her lobster with surgical precision, extracting every morsel as though she were harvesting the last drops of value from a depleted mine. Melissa ate slowly, photographing each plate for Instagram before tasting it, curating a feed that presented stolen luxury as earned elegance. "The old man is probably eating green gelatin in a common room right now," Troy said, wiping butter from his chin with a linen napkin. 3 meals a day and a window. That is the life he chose. "He did not choose it," Melissa murmured, but so quietly that Troy did not hear. "What was that, babe?" Troy asked. "Nothing," Melissa said. She took another sip of wine. She did not look at anyone. "Tell me again how much was in the account," Pamela said, leaning forward with the eagerness of a woman counting money she had not yet spent. $950,000, Troy said. "After the farm sells, we will have well over $1 million. He grinned the wide, unearned grin of a man who had just robbed a bank and found the vault unlocked. "We are set, ladies. For life." They toasted again. "To my name." To the man whose life they had dismantled to buy a fantasy neither of them had the character to sustain. Then the bill arrived. It came on a small silver tray, folded in heavy cream-colored paper, placed discreetly at Troy's elbow, by a waiter whose professional smile betrayed nothing. Troy snatched it up before anyone else could reach for it. He wanted to see the number. He wanted to feel the power of paying it. He opened the folder. 3,800 euros. He whistled, not in shock but in pride. "Not bad for a Tuesday," he said. "Let me get this one. I want the points on the corporate card." He reached into his wallet, bypassing the standard credit cards, and pulled out a sleek titanium card. He placed it on the silver tray with a flourish, the gesture of a man performing generosity for an audience. "Add 20% for yourself," he told the waiter with a wink. Service was acceptable. The waiter bowed slightly, took the tray, and walked toward the payment terminal near the entrance. Troy leaned back, linking his hands behind his head. "I love this island," he declared. "I feel like I was born to live here." He watched the waiter cross the terrace. He did not see the waiter insert the card. He did not see the waiter frown. He did not see the waiter try again. He did not see the waiter pick up the phone and dial the authorization center. In approximately 90 seconds, Troy Kingsley was going to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. And the tuition was going to be paid in full. The waiter swiped the titanium card through the terminal. The machine hummed for 2 seconds, a brief mechanical pause that offered a sliver of hope before the screen flashed red. The waiter frowned. He turned the card over. checked the chip, and inserted it again. Red. He picked up the house phone and dialed the authorization center while Troy sat 50 feet away, laughing at something Pamela had said about redecorating the imaginary villa. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Troy checked his watch. "What is taking so long?" he grumbled. "It is a simple transaction. Do they not know how to run a card in this country?" "Maybe they are admiring it," Pamela suggested. "They probably do not see many titanium cards on this island." Troy chuckled. "True. It is an exclusive club." Then the manager appeared. He was a compact man with a gray mustache and the posture of someone who had spent 30 years maintaining order in rooms full of wealthy people behaving badly. He was not smiling. Behind him stood 2 men in dark suits with earpieces. The restaurant's private security, positioned like bookends, framing a chapter that was about to end. Troy looked up expecting an apology. Perhaps a complimentary dessert for the inconvenience. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice carrying the mild irritation of a man who believed inconvenience was something that happened to other people. The manager stopped at the edge of the table. He held the titanium card between 2 fingers, not offering it back, holding it like a piece of contaminated evidence. "I am afraid there is a significant problem, sir," the manager said. His voice projected clearly across the terrace. Nearby diners lowered their forks and turned their heads. Troy scoffed. "Do not tell me the machine is broken. Just run it manually. The limit is unlimited." "The card has been declined," the manager said. "We have run it 3 times. We have also spoken to the issuing bank in the United States. They have instructed us to confiscate this card immediately. The corporate accounts associated with it have been frozen due to a writ of attachment filed this afternoon. The bank reported that the account holder is in default and the assets have been seized." "Default?" Troy stood up, his chair scraping against the stone floor. "Seized? That is impossible. Give me the card back. That is my property." The manager slipped the card into his jacket pocket. The 2 security men stepped forward, arms crossed. "The bank was quite specific, sir," the manager continued, loud enough for the shipping magnates and diplomats to hear every syllable. "This card is invalid. We cannot accept it." Troy's face cycled through colors like a traffic light in fast forward. Red, white, then a sick, yellowish gray. He reached into his wallet with trembling hands. "Here," he stammered, pulling out a Visa. "Try this one. Personal account, $50,000 limit." The waiter took it, walked to the terminal, and returned 30 seconds later. "Declined," he said flatly. Troy tried a MasterCard. Declined. He tried a debit card from a secondary account. Declined. Each rejection landed like a gavel strike, and the terrace grew quieter with each one. The other diners were watching now, their expensive meals cooling on their plates, their conversations abandoned in favor of the spectacle unfolding at the best table in the house. Melissa opened her clutch with shaking hands. "Try mine," she hissed, pulling out the debit card linked to my guardianship account, the card she had used to steal $950,000. "There is almost $1 million on this account," she whispered to the manager. "Run it." The waiter took the card. He ran it. He returned. His face revealed nothing, but his voice carried the finality of a closing statement. "Declined," he said. "Account frozen by the Internal Revenue Service. For suspicious activity." The silence that followed was absolute. It settled over the terrace, like a verdict read in open court. Even the wind seemed to pause. "The IRS," Melissa whispered. The 2 words left her mouth, like air escaping a punctured tire. Pamela clutched the edge of the table. Her knuckles were white. Her silk shawl had slipped off one shoulder. "What is happening?" she hissed. "Fix this, Troy. Fix it now." Troy could not fix it. Troy could not fix anything. He stood there, surrounded by empty plates and full wine glasses, and the wreckage of a fantasy that had lasted exactly 72 hours. He looked at the security men. He looked at the exit. He calculated the distance and concluded, correctly, that he was not fast enough. The manager checked his watch. "You have a bill of 3,800 euros, he said. "We require immediate alternative payment. Cash or items of equivalent value. Otherwise, I will contact the local police. Theft of services is a criminal offense in Greece. And I assure you, sir, it is prosecuted vigorously." Troy looked at Melissa. Melissa looked at Pamela. Pamela looked down at her own neck, where the gold chain and pendant caught the candlelight. She looked at her wrist, where a new watch gleamed, purchased yesterday at a jewelry shop in Fira with the first withdrawal from my account. The manager followed her gaze. "The necklace and the watch," he said calmly, "for the bill and the gratuity. You are robbing me." Pamela spat, her voice cracking. "I am settling an account, madam," the manager replied. "The alternative is a cell. Greece takes its hospitality laws very seriously." Troy looked away. He did not defend his mother. He did not defend anyone. He was a coward, dressed in linen, and linen wrinkles under pressure. Pamela unclasped the necklace with trembling fingers. She unbuckled the watch. She placed both on the silver tray, the same tray that had carried the bill, the same tray that had carried the titanium card. The manager inspected each item, nodded once, and stepped back. "You may leave," he said. He did not add sir or madame. The courtesy had been revoked, along with the credit. They stood. Melissa grabbed her clutch. Pamela pulled her shawl tight around her bare neck. Troy shoved his chair back without pushing it in. They walked toward the exit single file, heads down, navigating between tables of diners who watched them pass with the quiet amusement of people who had always known the difference between wealth and money. 4,000 miles away, in a Cracker Barrel parking lot in Nashville, I was reclining in the driver's seat of my old Buick. The remains of my grilled cheese sandwich sat in a crumpled wrapper on the dashboard. The radio was tuned to a country station playing something slow and sad about a man who lost everything and found himself on an empty highway. I did not know the details of what had just happened in that restaurant. Not yet. I would learn them later, from the police reports and the embassy transcripts, and the itemized bill that Gloria would eventually obtain through legal discovery. But sitting there in that parking lot, staring at the orange glow of the overhead lights, I felt something shift in the air. A vibration. A frequency. The kind of imperceptible tremor that a judge feels in his chest when he knows that somewhere justice is being served. I closed my eyes. The country song ended and another began. I fell asleep to the sound of a steel guitar and the distant hum of trucks on the interstate. It was the most peaceful sleep I had known in 3 weeks. The villa had a digital lock. When they arrived, sweating and humiliated from the restaurant, the keypad glowed red. Not the soft green pulse that meant welcome. Red. The color of a verdict that has already been decided. Troy jabbed his keycard against the sensor. Nothing. He flipped it over and tried again. The lock beeped once, short and final, and the light stayed red. He looked at the card as though it had personally offended him, then shoved it at Melissa. "You try yours." Melissa pressed her card to the sensor. Red. Beep. Pamela tried hers. Red. Beep. 3 cards. 3 rejections. The lock did not care about their frustration. It only cared about authorization. And authorization had been revoked. "They are demagnetized," Troy muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. The restaurant must have done something. Some kind of signal that wiped the cards. He was grasping at explanations the way a drowning man grasps at driftwood. Desperately and without logic, a voice spoke from the shadows behind them. "They are not demagnetized. They have been deactivated." They spun around. Standing at the edge of the terrace, illuminated by the pale glow of the pathway lights, was the villa's property manager. He was a tall Greek man with a close-trimmed beard and the patient expression of someone who had delivered bad news to wealthy tourists before and had learned to do it standing at a safe distance. Flanking him were two security guards in dark polo shirts, their arms folded across their chests like a human wall built from quiet authority. "Mr. and Mrs. Kingsley," the property manager said, his English precise and unhurried. "And Mrs. Cross. I am afraid there has been a development regarding your reservation." "Open this door," Troy demanded. "We have cash inside. In the safe. We will pay whatever balance is outstanding. The safe has been emptied by our security team under the supervision of the local authorities," the manager replied. He held up a sealed plastic bag containing a stack of euros. "This cash has been seized as partial payment for the accommodation charges your credit facility failed to cover. The card used to guarantee your booking has been reported as fraudulent by the issuing bank. We received notification from both the bank and the United States consulate this evening." "Fraudulent," Melissa gasped. "But that is our card. We booked it ourselves." "The bank disagrees, madame." The manager's voice carried no malice, only the practiced neutrality of a man who had learned that rich people and criminals often share the same luggage. "Your belongings have been packed. They are waiting outside the front gate." Troy looked past the manager toward the villa's entrance. Through the stone archway, he could see the shapes of their suitcases piled on the cobblestone sidewalk. 6 Louis Vuitton hard-shell cases, purchased at the airport duty-free in Athens with the first withdrawal from my account. They were stacked on top of each other like a monument to excess. "You cannot do this," Troy shouted, stepping toward the manager. "We are paying guests. We have rights. You are guests who cannot pay," the manager corrected, not moving. "And in Greece, that makes you trespassers. You have 5 minutes to collect your belongings and vacate the property. If you refuse, these gentlemen will assist you. And I should mention that the police have already been contacted regarding the fraudulent credit card. I suggest you are not here when they arrive." Something broke behind Troy's eyes. I have seen it happen in courtrooms. The moment when a defendant realizes the walls are closing in from every direction, and the only response left is the primitive one, the one that involves fists. Troy lunged forward and swung his right hand at the nearest security guard. It was a sloppy punch, fueled by panic rather than skill, the kind of blow a man throws when he has lost control of everything else and his body is the only weapon remaining. His fist connected with the guard's jaw, but the guard barely moved. He was a head taller than Troy, and built like a man who spent his mornings lifting stones on the beach. The second guard moved fast. He stepped behind Troy, locked his arms around Troy's torso, and drove him face first into the stone wall of the villa. Troy's cheek scraped against the rough whitewash. He screamed a curse in English that echoed off the narrow streets of Oia like a gunshot in a cathedral. In Greece, assaulting a service worker is a criminal offense prosecuted under Article 308 of the Hellenic Penal Code. It is not a fine. It is not a warning. It is an arrest, a holding cell, and a mandatory court appearance before a judge who does not care about your nationality, your excuses, or your titanium credit card. The police arrived in less than 5 minutes. 2 officers on a small patrol vehicle that navigated the narrow streets of Oia with the efficiency of men who knew every cobblestone. They dismounted without hurry. They assessed the scene. They saw a bleeding American pinned against a wall by a security guard and 2 women standing beside a pile of luxury luggage, crying. The lead officer spoke briefly with the property manager, then approached Troy. He produced a pair of handcuffs with the casual ease of a man who had done this many times before. "You are under arrest for assault and public disturbance," the officer said in accented English. "Come with us, please." Troy tried to speak. He tried to explain. He tried to invoke his American citizenship as though it were a shield that could deflect the laws of a sovereign nation. The officer was unimpressed. He turned Troy around, cuffed his wrists behind his back, and walked him to the patrol vehicle. Troy's new linen shirt was torn at the shoulder. Blood from his scraped cheek dripped onto the white fabric in small red circles. As they loaded him into the vehicle, Troy looked back. He saw his mother standing beside the suitcases, clutching her bare neck where the gold necklace had been. He saw Melissa standing alone on the cobblestones, her white sundress catching the moonlight, her face streaked with mascara that ran in dark lines down her cheeks like bars on a cell window. He did not say goodbye. He did not say "I am sorry." He simply disappeared into the back of the patrol vehicle, and the door shut behind him with a sound that carried no appeal. The vehicle pulled away. Its blue lights reflected off the whitewashed buildings of Oya, pulsing against the ancient stone like a slow mechanical heartbeat. Then it turned the corner and was gone. Melissa and Pamela stood alone on the street, two women surrounded by 6 suitcases they could no longer carry, in a country they could no longer afford, in a night that stretched ahead of them like a sentence without a period. The Aegean wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the sea and the distant sound of waves crashing against the volcanic cliffs below. It was 2 in the morning. The restaurants were closed. The shops were shuttered. The tourists were sleeping in beds that had been paid for. And my daughter and her mother-in-law had nowhere to go. The wheels of the Louis Vuitton suitcases rattled against the cobblestones, like bones shaking inside a coffin. Melissa dragged 2 cases behind her, one in each hand, while Pamela managed one, stopping every 30 feet to catch her breath. They left the other 3 on the sidewalk outside the villa. There was no one to help carry them. And pride, even when it has been stripped of everything else, still refuses to make 2 trips. The streets of Oya at 2 in the morning are not the postcard version. The whitewashed walls that glow like carved marble in daylight turn gray and cold in the darkness. The boutiques that sell handmade jewelry and linen dresses are sealed behind iron shutters. The only light comes from the occasional street lamp and the distant shimmer of the harbor below, where fishing boats rock gently in water that looks black instead of blue. They found a bench near the old castle ruins overlooking the caldera. It was stone, cold, and too short for either of them to lie down. Pamela lowered herself onto it with a groan. Her breathing had been worsening since they left the villa, each inhale accompanied by a thin, high-pitched whistle that cut through the silence like a wire being slowly tightened. "My spray," Pamela gasped, pressing a hand against her chest. "I need my spray. It is in the vanity case." The vanity case was one of the 3 suitcases they had abandoned outside the villa. Melissa looked back down the dark street they had just walked. The villa was 3 blocks away, and even if she went back, the property was locked. The security guards were probably still there. The inhaler was on the other side of a door that would not open for them ever again. "It is gone, Pamela," Melissa said. "We left it behind." Her voice was flat, emptied of everything except exhaustion. Pamela let out a sound that was half wheeze and half sob. The asthma was tightening her airways the way a fist tightens around a throat. Her face, which had been flushed from the walk, was turning a grayish pale under the street lamp. She needed that inhaler. Without it, each breath was a negotiation between her lungs and the cold Aegean air, and the air was winning. Melissa sat down beside her and pulled out her phone. The screen was cracked from when she had dropped it outside the restaurant. The battery showed 3%. 3% of power left in a device that had once held the keys to $950,000. She opened her email, hoping for something from Troy, from the consulate, from anyone who could tell her that this nightmare had an exit. There was one new message. The subject line glowed in bold red letters against the cracked screen. Urgent notification. United States Department of State. Consular Affairs Division. Melissa tapped the email. It loaded slowly, each line appearing like a sentence being read in a courtroom. To Mrs. Pamela Kingsley and Miss Melissa Cross. Notice of passport revocation and demand for surrender. Pursuant to an arrest warrant issued by the state of Tennessee for the charges of aggravated elder abuse and attempted manslaughter involving the use of a toxic substance, the United States passport belonging to Pamela Kingsley has been revoked effective immediately. The subject is considered a fugitive from justice and is required to surrender to the nearest United States consulate or local law enforcement agency for processing and extradition. Miss Melissa Cross is named as a person of interest and material witness, and is advised to present herself voluntarily during surrender proceedings. Melissa read the words twice. Attempted manslaughter. Fugitive. Extradition. Person of interest. The language was precise and merciless. The language of a system that does not negotiate with people who poison 71-year-old men in their own kitchens. She lowered the phone slowly. She turned to look at Pamela, who was hunched over on the bench, wheezing, clutching the collar of her blouse as though she could physically pull more air into her lungs. The same woman who had spent 12 years complaining that Raymond was too frugal. The same woman who had whispered to Troy that the money was wasted sitting in a bank. The same woman who had stood in Raymond's kitchen every afternoon for 3 weeks, pouring poison into chamomile tea with the steady hand of someone seasoning a soup. "You poisoned him," Melissa said. The words came out quiet but solid, like stones being laid one on top of another. "You actually poisoned my father." Pamela's wheezing paused for a fraction of a second. Her eyes darted to Melissa, then away. "I do not know what you are talking about," she rasped. "The email says attempted manslaughter, Pamela. Using a toxic substance. That is the tea. That is the sleeping pills. You told me it was melatonin. You told me it was harmless. You said it would just help him relax." Pamela straightened slightly, and even through the asthma, even through the cold and the humiliation, her voice found its old edge. "It was necessary," she hissed. "He was in the way. He was sitting on a mountain of money and letting it rot. I did what had to be done. For all of us. For us," Melissa repeated. She let out a sound that was half laugh and half scream, a broken noise that bounced off the old stone walls and scattered into the darkness. "There is no us anymore, Pamela. There is only you going to prison. And me, a person of interest. Do you understand what that means? It means they think I helped you try to kill my own father." Pamela reached toward her. "Melissa, listen to me. We are family. We stick together." Melissa stood up. She stepped back from the bench as though Pamela were contagious. "Family does not poison family," she said. "And family does not steal a dying man's medication money and fly first class to Greece to celebrate." She looked down the dark street toward the faint glow of the harbor. Somewhere down there was a police station. Somewhere down there were people with authority and forms and procedures that could separate her from the woman sitting on this bench. "I am going to the police," Melissa said. "I am turning you in. Maybe if I cooperate, maybe if I tell them everything, they will let me go home." "You cannot do that," Pamela shrieked, her voice cracking between the asthma and the terror. "You will destroy me. You destroyed yourself," Melissa said. "And you destroyed my father. We deserve this, Pamela. Every bit of it." Melissa grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She turned and walked down the cobblestone path toward the harbor, the wheels rattling against the stones like tiny gavels striking with every step. She did not look back. Pamela sat alone on the bench. The Aegean stretched out below her, a black expanse that reflected nothing but the faint lights of the fishing boats and the cold, indifferent stars. Her breathing was a thin, desperate whistle. Her gold necklace was gone. Her watch was gone. Her son was in a cell. And the woman she had called daughter-in-law for 12 years had just walked away to hand her over to the authorities. Somewhere in Nashville, in the far corner of a Cracker Barrel parking lot, I was sleeping in the back seat of my Buick. The upholstery smelled of old leather and gasoline. The seat was lumpy beneath my spine, but it was the most peaceful sleep I had known in 18 months, because justice, even when it travels 4,000 miles and arrives in the middle of the night on a Greek island, has a way of quieting the noise inside a broken man's chest. They spent 7 days on the island of Santorini without a single euro between them. I was not there to witness it. I did not need to be. The details arrived in pieces over the following weeks. delivered through official channels, embassy reports, police transcripts, and one particularly detailed account from a consular officer named David Whitfield, who later told Gloria Vance that in 22 years of foreign service, he had never processed a case quite like this one. The first 2 days were the worst. After Melissa walked away from Pamela on that stone bench near the castle ruins, she went directly to the Fira police station and surrendered her mother-in-law's passport. She gave a written statement identifying Pamela Kingsley as the individual named in the U.S. Department of State notice. The officers took the statement, photographed the documents, and told Melissa that Pamela would need to present herself voluntarily or face a formal arrest warrant through Interpol channels. Melissa returned to the bench at dawn. Pamela was still there, wheezing, her Louis Vuitton carry-on clutched to her chest like a shield. They did not speak for 6 hours. Troy remained in a holding cell at the Thira police station for 3 days before a magistrate set bail at €4,000. He could not pay. His wallet contained 2 maxed-out credit cards, a Tennessee driver's license, and a photograph of himself standing in front of a black Cadillac Escalade that no longer belonged to him. The magistrate noted for the record that Troy Kingsley had no verifiable means of support and ordered him held until the American consulate could arrange supervised release. Meanwhile, Melissa and Pamela moved through the island like ghosts. They dragged the 2 remaining Louis Vuitton suitcases from cafe to cafe, sitting at outdoor tables until the owners asked them to leave. They slept one night on a ferry terminal bench in Athenios port. Another night, they found an unlocked storage shed behind a church near Kamari Beach. Pamela's asthma worsened without proper medication. A local pharmacist gave her a single emergency inhaler for free after Melissa broke down crying at the counter and explained in broken English that they had no money and no way home. On the 4th day, Melissa finally contacted the U.S. Embassy in Athens. She spoke with David Whitfield, who explained the process with the kind of calm, rehearsed patience that only comes from years of delivering bad news to Americans who believed bad things only happened to other people. The United States government could issue an emergency repatriation loan. The loan would cover 3 economy-class tickets from Athens to New York. The tickets would be the cheapest available routing. The loan would be recorded as a federal debt, repayable in full within 90 days. And until it was repaid, their passports would be flagged, and they would be unable to obtain new ones. Whitfield also informed Melissa that the Department of State had received a formal request from the Davidson County District Attorney's Office to ensure that all 3 individuals, Melissa Cross Kingsley, Troy Allen Kingsley, and Pamela Jean Kingsley, were returned to U.S. soil as soon as possible for matters related to ongoing criminal investigations. Melissa agreed to everything. She had no choice. It took 3 more days to process the paperwork, arrange Troy's supervised release from the Thira station, and book the flights. During those 3 days, Pamela was treated at a small clinic in Fira for dehydration and respiratory distress. The doctor noted in his report that she was malnourished, anxious, and had not bathed in approximately 5 days. Troy was released into the custody of a consular escort officer who drove him from Thira to Athens in a government vehicle. He did not speak during the entire 4-hour drive. On the 7th day, they boarded a flight from Athens to Frankfurt, then Frankfurt to New York. John F. Kennedy International Airport, economy class. Middle seats. No champagne. No first-class lounge. No Instagram photographs. The flight lasted approximately 11 hours. When they landed at JFK Terminal 1 at 6:14 in the evening Eastern Time, 2 things happened simultaneously. First, Pamela Kingsley was met at the jetway by 2 officers from the Department of Homeland Security and a representative from the Davidson County Sheriff's Office who had flown to New York specifically for this moment. They presented her with a federal warrant for her arrest on charges of aggravated elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted manslaughter by poisoning. She was handcuffed in the terminal corridor in full view of approximately 200 passengers who had just deplaned from a flight arriving from London. She did not resist. She could barely stand. An officer carried her Louis Vuitton bag. It was the last luxury item she would touch for a very long time. Second, Melissa was escorted to a secondary screening room where two IRS criminal investigation agents were waiting. They informed her that a suspicious activity report had triggered a full audit of every account connected to her name, her husband's name, and any entity in which either of them held a financial interest. The total preliminary tax liability, including penalties and interest on the $950,000 transferred under the fraudulent power of attorney, had been calculated at $403,000. They also informed her that her personal bank accounts, her joint accounts with Troy, and 3 credit cards had been frozen pending the investigation. She was not arrested. She was told she was free to go. But she had nowhere to go. No active credit card, no cash, and a federal debt that would follow her for the rest of her natural life. Troy was processed separately. His assault charge from Greece had been communicated to U.S. authorities, and a detainer had been placed on his file. He was held overnight at a federal processing facility near the airport before being transferred to Tennessee the following morning. I learned all of this from Gloria Vance, who called me at 7:45 that evening while I sat on the porch of the Hickory Lane farmhouse with a cup of black coffee and the sound of crickets filling the silence that my broken hearing aid could no longer carry. She read the reports to me over the phone, one by one, in that measured voice she uses when she wants the facts to speak for themselves. I did not celebrate. I did not smile. I set the coffee down on the railing where Lorraine used to rest her glass of sweet tea every evening. And I looked out across the dark field, where the horses used to run when the farm was still alive with her laughter. Justice is not a feeling. It is a process. And the process was not finished, because in 6 weeks, every one of them would stand in a courtroom in Nashville, Tennessee, and for the first time in their lives, they would hear the words that I had spoken to hundreds of defendants over 35 years from behind the bench. All rise. The courtroom smelled like old wood and new paper. I arrived at the Davidson County Criminal Justice Center at 8:15 on a Monday morning in late October, 6 weeks after Pamela Kingsley was handcuffed at Terminal 1 of John F. Kennedy International Airport. The building had not changed since my last visit 3 years earlier, when I attended a retirement dinner for a colleague on the 4th floor. The same fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The same scuffed marble floors echoed under leather shoes. The same brass plaque near the elevator read, "Justice is the constant and perpetual will to render to each person what is due." I had walked past that plaque perhaps 10,000 times in my career without stopping to read it. That morning, I stopped. Gloria Vance met me in the lobby. She wore a charcoal gray suit with a single pearl brooch on the lapel. The same brooch she had worn the day we first met in her office on Music Row. She handed me a manila folder containing the finalized case summaries and court schedules. 4 separate proceedings. 4 defendants. All scheduled within the same 2-week window before Judge William Morrison in courtroom 12B. I sat in the 3rd row of the public gallery. I did not sit at the prosecution table. I did not testify. Gloria had arranged everything so that my presence was advisory only. I was there as a citizen, a father, a man who had been poisoned in his own kitchen and robbed while he slept 14 hours a day in a fog he did not understand. The first case was called at 9:30. The State of Tennessee versus Pamela Jean Kingsley. Pamela entered through the side door in an orange jumpsuit. She had lost considerable weight since Santorini. Her hair, which had always been dyed a shade of auburn that she claimed was natural, had grown out to a dull gray at the roots. She moved slowly, as though each step required negotiation with her own body. Her court-appointed attorney, a young man who could not have been older than 30, stood beside her and said almost nothing throughout the proceeding. The charges were read aloud. Aggravated elder abuse, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, attempted manslaughter by administration of a toxic substance. The prosecution presented the audio recording from the Bluetooth device, in which Pamela's own voice asked Troy about the sleeping pills in the tea, and Troy confirmed the timeline of 3 weeks. The prosecution also submitted medical records from a toxicology screen that Gloria had arranged within 48 hours of my visit to her office, confirming the presence of benzodiazepine metabolites in my blood at levels consistent with repeated involuntary ingestion. Pamela's attorney entered a guilty plea on all counts in exchange for a sentencing recommendation. Judge Morrison accepted the plea. He then delivered the sentence in a tone I recognized well. It was the tone I had used myself hundreds of times. Measured. Final. Without apology. 6 years in the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville. No possibility of parole for the first 4 years. Upon release, 10 years of supervised probation, mandatory substance abuse counseling, and a permanent restraining order prohibiting any contact with Raymond David Cross. Pamela did not look at me. She stared at the table in front of her, as though the wood grain contained some answer she could not find. The second case was heard 2 days later. The State of Tennessee versus Franklin. James Holt. Medical doctor. Dr. Holt arrived in a Navy suit that was too large for him. He had retained private counsel, a well-known Nashville defense attorney named Richard Barlow. But even Barlow could not overcome the evidence. The fraudulent cognitive decline certificate bore Holt's signature, his medical license number, and a date that corresponded exactly with the timeline established by the audio recording. Furthermore, Gloria had submitted my complete case file from United States versus Franklin Holt, the prescription fraud case I had adjudicated 11 years earlier, in which Holt had received a suspended sentence and 3 years probation. The new charges constituted a direct violation of that probation and demonstrated a clear pattern of criminal medical misconduct. Judge Morrison revoked Holt's medical license effective immediately. He sentenced Holt to 2 years in a federal minimum security facility for conspiracy to defraud a federal officer. Referring to my status as a retired member of the federal judiciary, and ordered him to pay restitution of $75,000 to the state of Tennessee's Elder Abuse Prevention Fund. Holt's hands trembled as the sentence was read. Barlow placed a hand on his shoulder. It did not help. Troy Kingsley's civil and criminal proceedings ran concurrently over the following week. The criminal assault charge from Greece had been formally transferred to U.S. jurisdiction under the Bilateral Legal Assistance Treaty. He pled no contest to the assault, received 18 months of supervised probation, and was ordered to complete 200 hours of community service. But the civil action was far more devastating. Gloria filed a demand for immediate repayment of the $200,000 promissory note, which Troy had signed voluntarily 4 years earlier when I loaned him the capital to start an insurance brokerage that failed within 11 months. The court granted a judgment in my favor with interest, bringing the total obligation to $214,000. Troy's bank accounts had already been frozen. His only remaining asset was a leased vehicle that was promptly surrendered. Judge Morrison imposed a 25% wage garnishment on any future earnings until the debt was satisfied in full. Troy left the courtroom without a dollar to his name, without a career, and with a criminal record that would follow him into every job interview for the rest of his working life. Within 2 months, he would be stocking shelves at a hardware store in Antioch for $11.50 an hour. And then there was Melissa. My daughter's case was the last to be heard. She entered courtroom 12B on a Thursday afternoon in early November, wearing a black dress that I recognized. Lorraine had bought it for her on her 30th birthday. Melissa had worn it to her mother's funeral, and now she wore it to the hearing that would determine the financial and legal architecture of the rest of her life. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division had completed its audit. The total liability, including the original tax obligation on the $950,000, plus penalties, plus accrued interest, plus failure to file amendments, came to $380,000. Melissa's personal assets totaled less than $12,000. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy the same week. The court also imposed 4 years of mandatory community service, 200 hours per year, at a nonprofit legal aid clinic in East Nashville. Every asset she and Troy had accumulated during their marriage, the leased furniture, the financed electronics, the clothing purchased on credit during the Santorini trip, was cataloged, valued, and scheduled for liquidation. When the judge finished reading the terms, Melissa looked across the courtroom for the first time. Her eyes found mine in the third row. She did not speak. She did not cry. She simply looked at me with an expression I had seen only once before. On the face of a defendant I sentenced in 2009, who realized, in the moment the gavel fell, that every choice he had made for the previous 5 years had led him to that single, irreversible second. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then I looked down at my hands. The gavel fell. Court was adjourned. But Melissa was not finished with me. And what she would say to me in the hallway outside courtroom 12B would be the most difficult words I have ever had to hear. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She caught me in the hallway before I reached the elevator. The corridor outside courtroom 12B was empty except for a bailiff who stood near the water fountain reviewing something on his phone. Gloria had already gone ahead to the parking garage to retrieve a set of documents from her car. The fluorescent lights above cast the kind of flat, colorless glow that makes everyone look 10 years older than they are. The marble floor was cold. I could feel it through the soles of my shoes. Melissa's voice came from behind me. "Dad." I stopped walking. I did not turn around immediately. I stood still and listened to the sound of her heels clicking against the marble, each step closer than the last, until she was standing directly behind me, and I could smell the faint trace of lavender that she had worn since she was 19 years old. Lorraine had given her that first bottle of lavender perfume on the morning of her freshman orientation at Vanderbilt. Melissa had worn it every day since. Even now. Even after everything. I turned around. She looked smaller than I remembered. The black dress hung loosely on her frame. Her eyes were red but dry. She had been crying before the hearing, not during it. She held her hands together in front of her stomach, fingers interlocked, the way she used to stand when she was a little girl, waiting to confess that she had broken something in the house. "Dad, I need to talk to you." I said nothing. I waited. That is what 35 years on the bench teaches you. The most powerful thing a judge can do is wait. She took a breath. "I know you will never forgive me. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking you to hear me. Just once. And then I will leave. And I will never ask you for anything again." I nodded. She spoke for nearly 4 minutes without stopping. She told me that Troy had convinced her the power of attorney was a standard financial planning document. She told me that Pamela had assured her the tea was a natural remedy for my grief, melatonin and chamomile, nothing more. She told me that by the time she realized the truth, they were already in Greece, and the money was already spent, and she did not know how to undo what had been done. She told me that she had surrendered Pamela's passport at the Fira police station because she finally understood that the woman she had trusted as a second mother was the same woman who had tried to destroy her real father. And then she said something that stopped me. "Mom would have forgiven me." I felt the words land somewhere behind my ribs, in the space where Lorraine's voice used to live. It was not anger that I felt. It was something older than anger. Something heavier. It was the weight of knowing that my daughter was both wrong and right at the same time. Because Lorraine would have forgiven her. Lorraine forgave everyone. It was her greatest gift. And her most dangerous flaw. I looked at Melissa and I told her a story she had never heard. In 2014, during my final year on the federal bench, I was assigned a case involving a regional pharmaceutical company that had falsified clinical trial data for a blood pressure medication that ultimately caused the deaths of 11 patients. The company's legal team offered me $500,000 to recuse myself from the case on fabricated grounds of conflict of interest. They delivered the offer through a third party, a former law school classmate of mine, over dinner at a restaurant on 2nd Avenue. The envelope was placed on the table between the bread basket and the wine glasses. I remember the exact position because I stared at it for a long time. I went home that night and told Lorraine everything. I showed her the envelope. I told her that $500,000 would pay off the farm, fund Melissa's graduate school, and leave enough for us to travel the way she had always wanted. I told her that no one would ever know. The recusal would appear routine. The case would be reassigned. The pharmaceutical company would likely settle quietly, and we would be free. Lorraine listened without interrupting. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, the same table where Pamela would sit 10 years later with poison in her bag. And she said 6 words that I have carried every day since. Raymond, the law is your spine. She told me that if I took the money, I would walk differently. I would stand differently. I would judge differently. Not because anyone would know, but because I would know. And the man she married was a man who stood straight. I returned the envelope the next morning. I tried the case. The company was found liable. The families received justice. And Lorraine never mentioned it again. Not once. Not even when the medical bills started coming and the farm needed a new roof and Melissa asked for money we did not have. I told Melissa this story in the hallway outside courtroom 12B. And when I finished, she was crying. Not the performative tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the quiet, shaking kind that comes when a person finally understands the full dimension of what they have lost. I said to her what I believed to be true. Your mother would have forgiven you, Melissa. She would have held you and told you that everyone makes mistakes and that love does not keep a ledger. And she would have meant it. But your mother also understood something that you have not yet learned. Forgiveness does not erase consequence. The law is not revenge. It is structure. It is the frame that holds everything else in place. And when you removed that frame from my life, you did not just take my money. You took my hearing. You took my dignity. You took 3 weeks of my life that I will never recover. You took the silence of this farm and filled it with the sound of your mother-in-law's lies. I paused. I love you. I have loved you since the first second I held you in the delivery room at Vanderbilt Medical Center on March the 14th, 1991. That love is not conditional. It is not transactional. It is permanent. But love and trust are not the same thing. And trust, once broken, does not heal on a schedule. Melissa wiped her eyes. She nodded. She did not argue. She did not beg. She straightened the black dress that her mother had bought her, and she turned and walked down the hallway toward the elevator without looking back. I stood there for a long time after she left. The bailiff had gone. The corridor was empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me like a conversation I could not quite hear. Then I walked out of the courthouse, into the late afternoon sun, and drove home to a farm that was waiting to be rebuilt. The farm did not rebuild itself. I rebuilt it. One board at a time. One decision at a time. One morning at a time. The first thing I did when the accounts were restored was drive to the First Tennessee Credit Union on West End Avenue and sit across from the same branch manager who had processed the fraudulent power of attorney transfer 6 weeks earlier. His name was Gerald Pace. He was 44 years old, recently promoted, and visibly uncomfortable when I walked through the door. He offered me coffee. I declined. He offered an apology. I accepted it. Not because it was sufficient, but because I have learned that accepting small apologies from small men is faster than demanding large ones. The full $950,000 had been recovered through a combination of federal asset seizure, insurance restitution, and court-ordered repayment schedules. Not every dollar came back at once. Some arrived in structured payments. Some arrived through the liquidation of items purchased during the Santorini trip. A pair of Cartier sunglasses bought on the island of Mykonos was sold at auction for $1,100. A Louis Vuitton suitcase, the one Pamela had clutched on the bench in Oya, brought $800. These numbers were small, almost absurd in the context of $950,000. But Gloria tracked every cent because Gloria Vance does not leave money on the table. When the balance was fully restored, I withdrew $300,000 by certified check. Gloria asked me what I intended to do with it. I told her I intended to give it away. She paused for exactly 2 seconds, which for Gloria Vance is the equivalent of a standing ovation. And then she said, "I will draft the paperwork." I drove the check to Hope Harbor, a nonprofit elder care and legal assistance center on Dickerson Pike in East Nashville. The building was a converted furniture warehouse, with a flat roof and barred windows. It did not look like a place where lives were saved. It looked like a place where furniture used to be stored. But inside, 12 staff members and 31 volunteers provided free legal representation, medical advocacy, and emergency housing to elderly residents of Davidson County who had been victims of financial abuse, neglect, or abandonment. The executive director was a woman named Sister Margaret Calloway, a 68-year-old former Franciscan nun who had left the convent at 40 to attend law school and had spent the subsequent 28 years building Hope Harbor from a single desk in a church basement into the most effective elder advocacy organization in the state of Tennessee. I had known Sister Margaret for 15 years. She had testified as an expert witness in 3 cases I adjudicated. She was 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed approximately 110 pounds, and was the most formidable person I have ever met in a courtroom or outside of one. I handed her the check. She looked at the number. She looked at me. She removed her reading glasses, cleaned them with the hem of her cardigan, replaced them, and looked at the number again. She said, "Raymond, this is $300,000. I said, "Yes." She said, "What do you want it used for?" I told her I wanted $150,000 allocated to direct legal representation for elder abuse victims in Davidson County. I wanted $75,000 allocated to an emergency housing fund for elderly individuals displaced by family fraud. And I wanted the remaining $75,000 to establish a permanent endowed fund to be named the Lorraine Cross Legal Aid Fund, which would generate annual income to support 1 full-time staff attorney at Hope Harbor in perpetuity. Sister Margaret did not cry. She was not the type. But she held the check against her chest for a moment the way a person holds a letter from someone they have not heard from in a very long time, and she said, "Lorraine would be proud of you." I believed her. Not because the words were comforting, but because Sister Margaret had known Lorraine. She had visited the farm twice for dinner. She had eaten Lorraine's cornbread and listened to Lorraine's stories about the garden and the horses and the way the light came through the kitchen window in September. Sister Margaret understood that Lorraine's name on a legal aid fund was not a memorial. It was a continuation. I left Hope Harbor and drove back to Hickory Lane. The farm took 3 months to restore. I hired a local contractor named Eddie Marsalis, a 61-year-old Army veteran who had rebuilt houses in the 9th Ward of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and did not believe in cutting corners or extending timelines. Eddie replaced the porch boards. He repainted the clapboard siding in the original white with green shutters. He repaired the roof, replaced the water heater, reinstalled the kitchen cabinets that Troy had stripped during the asset removal, and rebuilt the stone wall along the eastern property line that had been crumbling since 2019. I replanted Lorraine's garden myself. Tomatoes, basil, rosemary, marigolds along the border, the way she always arranged them, because she said marigolds kept the rabbits away and made the whole yard smell like summer was permanent. And then, on a cold Saturday morning in early December, I drove 40 minutes south to a horse rescue facility outside Murfreesboro, operated by a retired veterinarian named Dr. Ann Callahan. Gloria had mentioned the facility during one of our final meetings, not as legal advice but as something she thought I might need. She was right. The facility housed 17 rescued horses. Most had been seized from neglect situations. Some had been abandoned. One had been found tied to a fence post outside a foreclosed property in rural Maury County, with no food or water and a rope so tight around its neck that the scar was still visible. That horse was a 12-year-old quarter horse gelding, gray with a black mane, approximately 15 hands tall, calm in temperament, and utterly uninterested in impressing anyone. He stood in the far corner of the paddock and watched me approach with the kind of patient, unblinking gaze that I recognized from my own mirror. I named him Gavel. Dr. Callahan helped me load him into a trailer. I drove him back to Hickory Lane and walked him into the pasture behind the farmhouse, where Lorraine's horses had run for 23 years. He stood in the center of the field, lowered his head, and began to eat the grass as though he had always been there. I watched him from the porch with a cup of black coffee in my hand and the December air cold against my face. And for the first time in 7 months, the farm did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of a verdict I had been writing my entire life. I kept the hearing aid for longer than I should have. It sat on the nightstand beside my bed for weeks after the trials ended, next to Lorraine's photograph and a glass of water. I refilled every morning out of habit. The device was small, beige, curved like a comma, and completely useless. Troy had swapped the battery months ago, and even after I replaced it, the aid never worked the same way again. The audiologist in Nashville, a woman named Dr. Priya Khatri, told me the internal receiver had been damaged, likely from the insertion of an incompatible battery size. She offered to order a replacement. I told her I would think about it. I thought about it for 43 days. On a Sunday morning in mid-January, I woke before dawn. The farmhouse was cold. The kind of Tennessee winter cold that does not announce itself but simply waits inside the walls until you stop moving. I made coffee in the kitchen, black, no sugar, the way I have made it every morning since Lorraine died, because she was the one who added the sugar, and without her, the sweetness did not belong. I carried the coffee to the back porch. The sky was still dark, but the eastern edge had begun to soften into a pale gray that promised nothing and delivered everything. The field stretched out before me, frost covering the grass like a thin sheet of glass, and in the center of the pasture, Gavel stood motionless, his breath rising in slow white columns that disappeared into the air above him. I went back inside and picked up the hearing aid from the nightstand. I held it in my palm for a long time. It weighed almost nothing, less than an ounce, and yet it carried the full weight of everything that had happened. Every lie Pamela told over chamomile tea. Every recording Troy made while I stumbled through my own house in a fog I could not explain. Every document Melissa signed without reading. Every night I slept 14 hours and woke feeling less alive than when I closed my eyes. This small, beige, comma-shaped device was the instrument they used to silence me. Not with violence, not with a weapon, but with absence. They removed the world from my ears and replaced it with a quiet so deep that I mistook it for peace. I walked to the pond at the southern edge of the property. Lorraine and I had built that pond in 2003, the year after we bought the farm. We stocked it with bluegill and largemouth bass and spent summer evenings sitting on the dock with our feet in the water, listening to the frogs and the crickets and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the surface. Lorraine called it the only courtroom in America where nobody argued. I stood at the edge of the water. The surface was still. The frost had not yet reached it. I looked at the hearing aid one final time. Then I threw it as far as I could. It made a small sound when it hit the water. Not a splash, more of a whisper. A tiny interruption in the silence, and then the silence returned, and the pond was still again, and the hearing aid was gone. I stood there, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness, not relief, something quieter than both. Something that did not have a name in any legal code or medical textbook or dictionary I had ever read. It was the feeling of a man who had been buried alive and had dug himself out with his own hands and was now standing in the open air, breathing, with dirt still under his fingernails and sunlight on his face. I believe in God. I have believed in God since I was a boy, sitting in a wooden pew at Mount Zion Baptist Church on Buchanan Street, listening to Reverend James Alcott preach about the difference between justice and mercy. I did not always understand the difference then. I understand it now. God did not prevent what happened to me. He did not stop the tea from being poisoned, or the documents from being forged, or the money from being stolen. I do not believe God works that way. I believe God works the way a foundation works beneath a building. You cannot see it. You do not think about it. But when the storm comes and the walls crack, and the roof begins to sag. The foundation is the reason the building does not collapse entirely. God was my foundation. He was the reason I woke up on that morning in June and drove to Walgreens and discovered the $8.47 and did not break. He was the reason I called Gloria instead of calling the police. He was the reason I sat in that courtroom and watched my own daughter's life dismantle and did not look away. And God is the reason I am standing here now, on the edge of a pond my wife and I built together, on a farm I rebuilt with my own money and my own hands, with a horse named Gavel eating grass in a field behind me, and a legal aid fund bearing my wife's name helping people I will never meet. That is not revenge. That is not bitterness. That is the final verdict. I am 71 years old. I am a retired federal judge. I am a widower. I am a father, though the word carries a weight now that it did not carry before. I have arthritis in both hands and a pond with a broken hearing aid at the bottom and a horse who does not care about any of it. And I am still here. If you are listening to this story right now, I want to ask you something. Not as a judge, not as a legal authority, but as a man who learned the hardest lesson of his life. At an age when most people believe the lessons are over, have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never considered the possibility they were already planning your destruction? Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you handed them the keys to everything you built and watched them drive away without looking back? If you have, I want you to know something. The betrayal is not the end of your story. It is the end of a chapter. And the next chapter, the one you write with shaking hands and a broken heart in dirt under your fingernails, that chapter is the one that matters. Leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you survived. Tell me what you rebuilt. Because I have learned, after 35 years of listening to testimony from behind a bench, that the most powerful verdict in any courtroom is not the one the judge delivers. It is the one you deliver to yourself. On a cold morning, standing at the edge of a pond, when you finally decide that the silence does not own you anymore. My name is Raymond David Cross. I am a retired judge of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Tennessee. I served for 35 years. I judged thousands of cases. I sent men to prison and set men free and carried the weight of every decision home with me at the end of every day. But the case that mattered most was the one I never expected to try. The case of a father versus the family he built. The case of trust versus betrayal. The case of silence versus truth. The verdict is in. Court is adjourned.